It is to that day that Heidi, Jonathan, Linda, Jason, and I gathered in the living room to talk about Rett syndrome. Here is to our conversation tonight in the hope and wish that it brings about a sense of awareness, compassion, love, and resolution. When I walked into your home, you know the old story that you can tell a lot about people by looking at their library? So I just gravitate to people's library shelves, you know. And there were two books that I just allowed myself to move towards. One, I picked this one because I used to be on the radio, and I thought this was a wonderful name. It just reminded me of, you know, a radio sweetheart. Mm-hmm. And I also thought that green would look nice next to the green. And right next to it was this book, which is called The Philosophy of Life, which I thought was grand. So I pulled the two books off of the thing and I just put them down here. And Linda and I sat down for a second and we opened the book. Linda looked at the philosophy book. I looked at Radio Sweetheart. And I noticed that on the first page of the book is February 16th, 1945, which was my birthday.
Oh my God.
Wow, that's pretty interesting.
Wow.
That's a little freaky. But you got drawn to that book.
Wow.
I was drawn to the book before I opened it and realized that that date, my exact date that I was born, was
And
February
where?
16th,
Wow.
1945. Make of that what you will.
Yes.
Wow.
A radio sweetheart was born.
Very interesting.
We may have to give you that book.
Good sign.
Sorry. What's Rett syndrome?
Oh my. Besides heartbreak, Rett syndrome is kind of like having cerebral palsy and Parkinson's and autism all rolled into one. And then for many girls, it's also having seizures and breathing abnormalities and GI issues, you know, painful stomach problems, extreme anxiety. It's quite a long list.
What causes it?
It's a genetic mutation. That's a spontaneous mutation. It only affects girls.
Primarily.
Overwhelmingly, 99.99%. It's an X chromosome disease, why it affects women. There is no known reason as to why it happens, so it's classified as a spontaneous mutation, and the interesting thing about it is it affects the population statistically uniformly around the globe. It has no bias for race, gender, ethnicity, wealth, geographic, political, anything.
I know neither of you are scientists.
Mm-hmm.
I met both of your daughters earlier today. And I watched your daughter Hannah swimming, eating, dancing to the Beatles,
Yeah.
hanging out. You know something? If Linda hadn't told me that we were going to visit a young lady who has this condition, I probably would have thought, you know, maybe Hannah's not particularly verbal with me, but outside of that, she seemed like any other little girl her age. I am told that when we look at Hannah, we're looking at a child who has been touched by Rett syndrome, the way a painter may have put a dot on a canvas, but she has not been impacted by the syndrome to the degree that most are with a wide brush across the canvas. And that it is so important that for people who are going to be experiencing our conversation, they understand that when they observe Hannah, they are not observing the full impact and devastation of this hideous syndrome.
Very true.
Could you explain to all of us what it is like symptomatically with children who have been painted with the broader brush? And you can go into as much detail as you need to, because I feel that folks really need to understand that to evoke their compassion.
Okay, so we're not talking about Hannah, we're talking about classic Rett syndrome. So,
Yes.
well, I mean, the first thing is the seizures that the girls, they're tormented by seizures. Some of them on a daily basis. And unless you've seen, I mean, your own daughter having a seizure, if you've seen a child having a seizure, you can't really imagine the devastation just of that one symptom alone. Where these children are just, you know, they're prisoners in their own body. You know, their body's violently shaking. I mean, I don't know if you want to hear all these kinds of details, but
I do.
so the body is violently shaking. These children have no control, these little girls, over what their body is doing. You know, it's painful, it's exhausting. They, you know, after their seizure, they sometimes will sleep for 24 hours just to recover. And then the parents are desperately trying to stop the seizures, so they're giving them these different types of drugs that most times don't work, and then knocking the children out, and then they have to try this one and then that one, because you can imagine as a parent, you're desperately trying to stop. That's just one symptom. You know, and then the girls are trapped in their bodies. I mean, the light's on, somebody's home, but they can't get out. That's what I heard somebody say one time. And to be constantly, even Hannah wrings her hands so much that she gives herself a permanent bruise. But what am I going to do? Like bind her arms so that then she can't do anything with her hands? No, I'm not going to bind my child's arms.
Do some
So-
people
But
do?
some people
They do, because their children have no
They
use of
use-
their hands at all. So they're not stopping them from doing anything but self-harm.
Yeah, they basically will sometimes put like a soft cast on, which will require the arms
Just so
to
that
be
the hands
this,
can't
so
like
they
this,
can't-
because they mutilate,
over.
they injure
Hurt
themselves. They can't
themselves.
stop.
And it's only, and the symptom is 100% replicated in animals as well. In the animal models, the mice that are genetically engineered to have Rett do what they call hind clasping. They do this with their hands, if you see in any of the videos. And human beings do the exact same thing, and it's unknown as to why that particular symptom happens. And some are much more severe than others. In Hannah's case, she can actually control it and stop it when she wants to. Some girls cannot. It's
They can't stop it.
impossible.
It's completely every waking moment. In fact, even Hannah sometimes when she's sleeping, as she's falling asleep, I'll see her doing
Yeah.
this a
But-
little bit.
But to get back to your question to start with, girls that have classic Rett, what we would consider classic Rett, and let me back up even further, put in perspective, because you mentioned Hannah. One of the most experienced clinicians in the United States, he's been involved in the disease for well over 30 years, seen over 1,200 Rett girls, which is an enormous amount for one individual. And Hannah's part of the National Institute of Health Natural History study that he runs. He has told us several times that of all the girls he's seen, she's in the top 5 of girls out of 1,200. So to put that in perspective, she's completely different than the majority, the overwhelming majority of the population. But most of the girls with
yeah.
classic Rett are not walking or talking from birth. They're not
No,
communicating.
some of them say a few words and then they lose everything.
Yeah, and then there's another group
So they
that goes
can't
through a
talk.
regression later.
They can't talk. They can't walk.
They
have seizures.
let's go down this list
Yeah.
slowly.
Okay.
Most
Most
children
girls. Yes.
suffering from Rett, most little girls, they cannot speak,
No.
they cannot walk,
No.
More.
have no use of their hands.
So they want to say something, but their body won't move the way that they, what their intention is, and nor
Most-
will their. It's a movement disorder on the grandest scale.
Most-
Seizures, as I mentioned.
Most are wheelchair bound as they get older, the overwhelming majority. So they have gross motor deficiencies and skills because the severe hypotonia of the muscles in the core, which causes a number of problems, including in RETT, because of the muscles in the core and because of other reasons related to the proteins and how it reacts with the muscles. The girls, as they get older, tend to get severe scoliosis.
Yes.
Because the
That's
muscles
another
don't
thing.
hold the spine in place. They have
Parkinson-like tremors.
Parkinson-like tremors, as Heidi mentioned earlier, severe GI tract issues because either the bowel or the stomach or part of the GI tract will go from periods of inactivity to activity, mostly induced by the brain, where it will, in effect, stop working, and which will create all kinds of issues from severe constipation to severe gas.
There'll be an excruciating pain. I mean, you can't do anything when you're in excruciating stomach
and because they
pain,
can't
you know?
communicate.
Can you imagine, like, almost on a daily basis, these girls are dealing with this kind of.
And because they can't communicate,
Inconsistency,
parents at a parent level are guessing a lot of times as to what is impacting their child. Because a lot of the girls, they don't have verbal movement, they don't have good use of their hands. And what they're finding now, and the research in the last few decades about what Heidi said earlier about girls being trapped in their bodies, the reason that everyone now knows that, because decades ago, a lot of these women and girls were thought to be mentally retarded. But that's proved 100% incorrect. It's absolutely, the girls are 100% cognitively aware, trapped in their bodies, and they're able to use their eyes. So you'll hear or read in any of the literature or any statements by parents, the girls, and even doctors will say this, that they always felt that the girls were communicating with their eyes. And that kind of latched on, and through research, now there's the use of eye gaze computer technology, and the girls are operating at their appropriate age level or appropriate grade level
And
because of
define what
opening
eye
of-
gaze is.
So being able to look at a screen and have the retina picked up by a computer that can determine what the eye is focused on. And it's Stephen Hawking, the famous physicist, uses eye gaze computers in order to write his books and communicate and everything. And that technology was incredibly expensive and has now gotten a lot cheaper, so it's available to more of the masses. It's not quite there yet for everybody, but it is getting there. And they're finding with the use of that has really proven that girls are 100% cognitively aware. So our children are trapped inside their own bodies. We now know that through research. And then in addition, have all of these physical ailments of this confluence of, as Heidi mentioned, diseases like the MECP2 gene mutation, which is actually the gene that has the mutation, which then the MECP2 protein, which it produces, is a very complicated protein in the human brain. We all have it, it's in all of our cells. But there's a mutation along that protein line. It's like computer code, ones and zeros. And instead of a 1 being there, there's a 0. And so the protein is read by the brain up to a point, and then it becomes junk after that. And because of the complexity of the different things that this gene may control, both it's thought to be both a upregulator, turns things on, and a suppressor and turns things off in a very complicated fashion. And without that, because it's one of what we call the master class genes that control so many things in our bodies, it causes a lot of different systems not to work properly. And depending upon the severity of the particular mutation, where along the strand of pearls the mutation exists.
Or what type of mutation.
or-
It could be a missense,
what
a
type.
nonsense, or a deletion.
And then how much, also because what happens with girls, they have 2 X chromosomes, 1 X turns itself off over time. We all have genes that we have a good copy and a bad copy that turn themselves off. But in women, the reason they survive and boys don't, because boys have an X and a Y, the X turns itself off, they die. With 2 X's, you can survive, but there's what's called an X inactivation skew. The more of the good gene that stays on, that also the less affected the girls are. The more severe, it's thought, so the less good, the more bad that stays on, and the good that shuts off, the more severe it can be. So there's a lot of focus on that research in those types of areas as well. And that can also determine the severity. And then now we're finding that there are girls that have a severe mutation and may have a severe X inactivation skew, but are either not as bad or maybe present almost perfectly healthy. And now we're finding there are modifier genes that are producing other types of protein that may be, for some of the population, protecting them.